Tonight on Cosmic Cantina, did a cast member of a new series called Expedition Bigfoot get sent home because Sasquatch can emit a fear frequency? Could UFOs and Bigfoot sightings be related? And did U.S. soldiers take down a giant in Afghanistan? I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and every week I go to my favorite bar, Cosmic Cantina, and kick back with my co-hosts, Josh Golembeske and Matt O'Connor. We talk about aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, ancient cultures, and anything from the unseen world that needs a little illumination. All right, welcome to Cosmic Cantina. Tonight we are drinking a volcanic rouge from Oregon. So classy.
It's lovely.
Yep. All right, you guys, tonight is a very exciting show because we are going to be talking about Bigfoot and giants and all sorts of weird, really tall, hairy creatures.
That aren't me.
And in the vein of that, I don't necessarily have an article, but I would just like everybody to know that literally the FBI has a file called Bigfoot. Since 1976, they have literally opened a file on Bigfoot. They tested some skin and some hair, although they reported that it was of deer origin and that it wasn't Bigfoot. They still have a file today named Bigfoot. Why do they still have a file on it?
But it wasn't anything special, if I remember correctly, right?
No. So basically, they kind of closed the file. It's a little bit like our previous show where we talked about UFOs, where it's like, oh, we reported on something, but it's just a weather balloon or it's just a flock of birds. But in this case, yes, a piece of skin with hair was given to the FBI. They opened up a file on it. They tested it. They said, oh, it's just deer origin. And then it kind of fell apart. But of course, for people who believe, that's pretty big. I mean, let's open a file on Bigfoot.
No, totally. It's exciting the FBI investigated it. Let's just break something down. One, there's not one Bigfoot. It's a species, right?
Big feet.
Yeah, big feet. There's over 100 Native American names for it. It's seen around the world in most places. They range in size. They range in attitude. Some are aggressive, like the ones, the skunk apes in Florida. Some are more solemn, like the Pacific, like the one everyone thinks about when they think about Bigfoot. They're thinking about the Pacific Northwest, and the giant 12-foot alpha male Bigfoot. That's what they're thinking about. There's also the Yeti. They're white. There's many, many examples of a Bigfoot.
The Yowie in Australia. That's
right, the Yowie. We're going to have a great story about that later.
Yes.
And also, just to be clear, Bigfoot is real in the sense that there was an upright walking gigantic ape over 10 feet tall called Gigantopithecus, which was a real ape in the fossil record that was giant and upright. So we know that. So Bigfoot is real in a sense. Is it alive today? That is a question most people get into. I think so, yes. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but I also want to live in a world where Bigfoot is real. So I'm biased, especially for this reason, because my brother, Ryan Golembeske, was a longtime producer for Finding Bigfoot, and he was recently the host of a new Bigfoot show called Expedition Bigfoot that aired on Travel Channel on Sunday. It was really interesting, actually. Before I get into the other characters on it and go into it, I just love their setup. This is what I think everyone should have done, what people should do when they produce shows about Bigfoot. They found a spot in Oregon. They took all this information, they used an algorithm, and they used it, and they based the information off of all the sightings on the internet and where people were seeing and what time of year, and they found one spot in Oregon, deep in the woods, where for 3 weeks there tends to be a ton of sightings around that area. So they found a hot zone. And they use a bunch of crazy math and algorithms to figure out this spot. They haven't really told us yet in the series how they found it, but they allude to the fact they use a lot of data science to figure this out.
So they didn't just go out into the forest with a guy named Bobo and start putting chickens on trees and stuff and calling him out with... they went the scientific route.
No, not this time. My brother's actually great friends with Bobo, too. He has a bunch of crazy stories about it. So the other cool thing about this is they used tech. They used really interesting tech. They used drones with LiDAR technology. LiDAR is basically radar, but with lasers. And you can shoot it through foliage, like dense forest foliage, and get small details on the ground, which is super compelling. So they're using it not to find an actual Bigfoot, but to find caves or structures that could be associated with a Bigfoot and other things. And I actually interviewed my brother, which I'll play in a couple minutes, that really goes into some of the cool stuff about the show. But to break it down quickly, there's 4 people in the cast. The first guy's name is Bryce Johnson, and he's an actor. You recognize him. He was actually in a Bigfoot documentary movie called Willow Creek, written and directed by Bobcat
Goldthwait.
Yeah. Right. It was actually pretty good. Found footage movie, really good. Bryce started a podcast, and he's kind of like popular in the Bigfoot world. There's a primatologist who she is great, and she studies obviously apes, and she's been around the world, and she brings science to the table. And there's an ex-military guy who brings a lot of experience, who wants to prove it. And then my brother, who they call RPG, because that's his initials, Ryan Paul Golembeske,
right?
Who is a Bigfoot enthusiast and like a known figure in the space.
Okay.
So it's the four of them out in the woods looking for Bigfoot. Now, unfortunately, my brother developed terrible migraine headaches when they were shooting the first couple days. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the show, they actually had to helicopter him out of the forest to a hospital.
Oof.
Which is terrible and devastating.
And he's never had migraines before.
Never in his life.
What was it?
Well, I interviewed him, so let me play a clip of us talking about that.
I went to 4 doctors, an eye doctor, 2 ER doctors, and a holistic doctor. And none of them could explain why I was filtering through all 9 types of migraine headache at different times, including panics, including dizziness, including shooting lights, everything. Working on finding Bigfoot, I did that for years, and that's where I really met everyone in the industry. I shook hands with everyone. I helped everyone have a great time, but I also collected stories. And there are a lot of stories that seem to be about infrasound. Do I think that they can use it? I don't know. But what happened to me is something that no doctor so far can tell me what happened. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross things off my list. And this has given me a new mission, because we've been talking a lot about that before, because one of my big theories is that they do use it, and how I wanted to add to the Bigfooting community was I want to develop a mobile infrasound device to determine if this is actually happening to people and if this is real. And I believe that they use infrasound just like tigers, whales, elephants to communicate. And I think they do it both to intimidate, to disorientate, to stun so they can steal. And the thing about an infrasound device is very simple. All it does is determine between 3 things. It will tell you if the infrasound is either mechanical, environmental, or animal. Maybe there's a language within it. I mean, who knows? The possibilities are endless, and that's what's radically exciting about it. And the only animal in North America that uses infrasound is the American alligator. So obviously I will going to keep our investigations far north. So there's no way it can be any other animal. And if we turn that thing on in the woods, and we are getting calls, and we are getting action in the woods, and it picks up animal infrasound, well then, in my humble opinion, we just proved that relic hominids are real.
That infrared sound is really fucking freaky.
It's a real thing, too. It's a real thing. Apex predators, lions, alligators, and maybe Bigfoot produce this sound, which I thought was really interesting. I did some research on frequencies, and apparently it's 19 and 18. 20 hertz is where human beings can start hearing things, but below that you can't. So 18, 19 gives you all these symptoms: dizziness, nausea, even paranormal things, which is crazy.
Right.
I found this article on The Guardian, written by Mark Pilkington, called The Fear Frequency. Totally butchered that. It's going to be fine.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm not going to give too many details, but basically there was a guy in the 80s who was an engineer who worked at a lab designing medical equipment, and everyone thought the place was haunted. They were seeing things out of the corner of their eye, like apparitions. They were getting the hair on the back of the neck would stick up. They'd just feel fear for no reason. They would hear sounds. They would be uneasy all the time. And this engineer kind of noticed that there was something kind of wrong with a foil blade clamped in a vise that was vibrating, whatever that means, and it was causing this noise. He figured out something was causing this noise, about a 19 hertz throughout the entire office.
Right.
He turned it off, and immediately everyone felt better, and no one experienced anything paranormal after that point. So what he's proposing is that a lot of hauntings could be based off this frequency, which makes sense. If people are feeling fear from lions and alligators and Bigfoot, it's the same frequency, which I thought was super, super interesting.
Wow.
So maybe my brother did get exposed to this, because he got better after that. Once he left the forest and was back home, it all went away.
Right.
So you wonder.
There's a guy in the UK, which I want to interview on our upcoming podcast at some point, who has done a lot of work on this, and he is actually able to capture on film what makes that fear frequency. Like,
oh, really?
It's like almost like he's captured like little AI devices, and he's proven how they go into your head and they create these apparitions, and and all this fear you feel internally, and this you kind of get phobias and have mental breakdowns and all that kind of
So
stuff.
it's a technology, not an entity?
It's a technology. He has images and video. He's really fascinating, but it kind of backs up this same kind of idea of like this fear frequency. They're trying to keep you away from something. So if they're looking for Bigfoot and Bigfoot doesn't want you to find them, if they have that ability to do that, then they will send that frequency out. But you had a story, right?
Yeah, so I was digging through.
You have a Bigfoot in your backyard?
Yeah, I was digging through my backyard. No, I was. I quite often go to the Bigfoot subreddit on Reddit,
Yeah.
and I was like digging through some past entries, and I came across one that I'd read before, and I was like, oh man, this was so good. I hadn't heard it before. Strap in, folks. So this guy's who wrote it. It's his experience. He's German. He had like a work visa in Canada. He's like 21 years old at the time, and this was about a year ago. I think this popped up. I went deep into the subreddit, back in the archives. Anyway, the title is called "They Don't Want Me to Tell Someone, But I'll Do." Dead Bigfoot encounter and government ? Harassment.
Ooh, a government cover of a Bigfoot story. Huh?
A German in Canada.
Yeah,
What
so-
does he have to say?
So basically, he was driving along. He said he loved driving along this road. It was like super quiet and loved the forest around him. And it was just kind of this long stretch of road. A lot of trucks and stuff would go through. But it was like 11, close to midnight at night. And he was sort of driving along, and he was in this van. I forget what work he was doing there, but it was whatever. He was working something up in Canada, in sort of a remote location. But he comes across this truck that's pulled over to the side. The hazards are on, and so he decides to, being a good citizen, he pulls over in front of the truck, goes back to the truck, and like knocks on the door to see if everything's all right, if he can help or whatever. Doesn't get an answer from, he can't really see up into the truck. So he knocks again, doesn't get an answer. And then he just decides to open the door. He opens the door and he sees the trucker sitting in the sort of the back cab section of the truck, the sleeper section. Mm-hmm. And he's like, he's got his knees, hugging his knees. And he's just like, he said he was pale and just staring.
He was alive?
He was alive, yeah, but he was in shock. So, this German guy asks, "You all right? What's going on?" And he describes this trucker being in shock, trying to answer him, and he's like stuttering and just saying like, "I hit it, I hit it." And he's like, "Oh, you hit what?" And then so he asks, "Did you call the cops?" And he's like, "No, I haven't called the cops yet." So he's like, "All right, well, I'll go back to my van and I'll call for help." So he walks back to his van, and on the way back to his van, he looks at the front of the truck, and it's like smashed in, and there's blood everywhere. And he's like, "Oh man, whatever he hit, it was big. It must have been a bear." He didn't know the area. He didn't know if there were bears or not in the area, but
Makes sense.
so he's
Bears.
like, "Yeah, but it like crumpled
Canada.
the front of this truck in." So he gets back to his car. Calls for an ambulance, or no, not ambulance, but just emergency. Just called emergency services, and they said, "All right, we'll send them people, we'll come running." So he's like, "Great." So he goes back to the guy, and he's like, the trucker, and he says, "Relax, no worries, people are coming, it's all good." So the trucker doesn't really say anything, he's just like staring. So the German guy goes back to his car, gets a flashlight, and starts looking because he wants to see, like, holy shit, this guy hit a bear. So he wants to see what happened. So he kind of follows a bit of a blood trail.
Ooh.
And then sees this big, he said this thing had to have been 9 foot tall. A big, hairy man. And he said, there was some odd descriptions that he listed. One being the eyes he said they weren't glowing, but they had they did have like this kind of odd red hue to them.
Really?
Like an orangey red sort of, it was a glow, but they weren't emitting light.
Is that because of infrared, maybe? Because maybe they see at night, and your eyes
maybe.
would do that at night.
I don't know. Yeah.
Huh.
But he said the teeth were also really interesting looking too. He described them as a shark's teeth. They were like pointed and terrifying looking.
I wonder if he just saw giant primate incisors, you know? You know how
Maybe,
gorillas
yeah.
have, like,
Maybe
those
that's kind of... I mean, he kind of describes himself after seeing this going into shock, like he walks back, because this thing,
So
he
it's
said
dead,
it was
obviously.
dead, yeah. He said it was, the head was almost like off. It was basically decapitated after it got hit by the